All right, Bitcoin. This is the topic we want to break down into great detail. You've had a number of correct calls on Bitcoin, including it testing and breaking through 25,000. Bitcoin has been doing well in this environment, surprisingly well, perhaps because conceptually it is seen as an investment away from traditional finance, away from centralized finance, which is why it was conceived by Satoshi in the first place after the financial crisis of 2008. Bitcoin kind of weathering the storm there. It's up as of this time about 46% year to date, beating stocks and gold, even though we do have a slightly stronger dollar. Break down your Bitcoin outlook for us.
So something you mentioned, which you can't help but smile at it, is that the fiat system, the banking system, is actually helping make the case for why Bitcoin is a necessity here. And I think that that's something that we have to all kind of take note of, and then also say this is a major step. I think we're going to look back at this period and say this is one of the key moments why Bitcoin is now such a major asset in 5 or 10 years from now. So ultimately, do I think that the selling in Bitcoin is over? No, honestly, I don't. I think that in the short term, the fear in the banks caused a lot of money from banks to go into Bitcoin as a safety play. I also think that we saw USDC decoupling over last weekend. People said, hey, I don't even want to be in stable coins right now, so I'm going to go into Bitcoin as well. So I think that was kind of the reason for this latest move. I think once the financial system comes a little calmer, then you might see Bitcoin head down. And I still worry that if I'm correct that the S&P is going to drop another 25% or so from here, then I do think it drags, just by fear, it drags cryptocurrencies lower overall. Now, long term, I'm a huge bull on Bitcoin, and I think I get classified as a bear because I've talked about a fall since 69,000. But long term, I still love it. I think it's the future of the digital gold world. And I think that there's a real need, and we see it today. There's a real need for Bitcoin.
Look, you did say it was going to break and not hold at 25K. It's at around 24,200 at this time. You have mentioned that your short-term target is for Bitcoin to pull away all the way down to 13,000 and even to 9,000. Is that still your sort of short-term call on Bitcoin? And exactly in what timeline?
Yeah, so I think you have to be looking at in the course of this year. By the end of the year, I likely think we'll at least hit 12 to 13,000. And the basics of this are that, number one, we have to still wait for regulation. So especially with the uncertainty, I mean, yes, the banking situation has pushed money in here, as has the USDC issues. But I think ultimately we have to remember that you're at a point where regulation is still keeping big money out, and that people are still subject to absolute fear. So when we get in a scenario where we start to see more and more panic selling in the markets, in the economy is starting to dip into recession, my guess is it gets sold across the board. So assets, maybe gold survives in that period and doesn't dump, but even during COVID, if we remember the COVID collapse, even gold dumped. And that's where I kind of think that we're going to see the big dump on Bitcoin, one final flush down. I'm going to be waiting and nibbling kind of once we get in that sub 15,000 level, all the way down to 9,000 if it gets there.
So you're saying that it's not going to be seen as a safe haven asset, and that fear is going to get the money out of Bitcoin, even though it is supposed to be seen as a safe haven asset by Bitcoin maxis?
Yes, and that's what I believe. So in the near term, right, so based on what's going on in the banking system right now, it actually has had a little period of this is a safety play to put money into Bitcoin. But if you look historically at Bitcoin, it's gone down when the stock market's gone down. And I think that isn't fully decoupled yet. I think we're seeing these flashes of what Bitcoin can be, this amazing asset that is a protection asset against other issues in the global sphere. But it's not quite there yet. It's still an immature, right? It's a 14-year-old. So it's a teenager. It's wild. It's crazy. We have to be ready for that. And I do think when the S&P, if the S&P dumps as much as I think, Bitcoin will get caught up in that selling. Remember, a lot of these assets, there's kind of cross breeding, meaning that as we see stocks drop, they're going to be margin calls, and they may have to be met through selling some of crypto. So it kind of all gets caught up in that scenario.
So, well, a couple of points there. I mean, one is, of course, the best way to diversify and to have an uncorrelated asset. But before we get into what that could be, all right, so Bitcoin is a teenager, and as we know, teenagers never behave exactly how you would like them to behave, drive you insane. So you're thinking, what, 13,000 Bitcoin by 2023. What is your 2023 outlook if, as you say, all of these recession concerns come to fruition, the S&P 500 tanks as much as you expect that it will? Yes. I know it's out there, and I know a lot of things can happen, but right now, what are you looking for Bitcoin to be at?
Yeah, so Bitcoin ran into a ton of resistance. We can see again on the chart here, the high from August of 2022. That's exactly what we've hit over the last couple days here, as well as about a month and a half ago. And my guess is what we're going to do is we're going to come down and test this level of two major trend lines that coexist here at around 18,200. That's going to be a technical bounce level, no doubt about it. But if we break that, then we head to that 15,600 level. You break 15,600, and then the next stop is that 12 to 13,000 level. So again, my projections are showing that eventually that will happen, likely by year end, and we should revisit that 12 to 13,000. I think the 10,000 break to 9,000 would be a case of the all-out bloodbath that would actually put in the bottom. As you think about how many people probably have stops right around 10,000, and that break point would create max fear, which actually is how bottoms are made.
What does it do to the narrative that Bitcoin is supposed to be a hedge against inflation when we'll be seeing, as you anticipate, that inflation cannot be controlled by the Fed, that inflation will continue to rise? What does it do for that argument then?
Yeah, so right now, right, I mean, if we look at inflation and what it's been over the last 12 to 18 months, and then what Bitcoin's done, we see it's definitely not a hedge, right? It's definitely not. Bitcoin has come down from 69,000 all the way bottoming out to 15,600. So that's not the case at this point. I do believe it becomes that asset in the future once we get regulation in there, we get transparency and all these other things. But yeah, right now that's not the case, even though it's showing glimpses of what it wants to become. Like, think about this, right? You have a 14-year-old and you go out on the basketball court, or you go out and they show you a couple glimpses of being a superstar, but they're not a superstar yet. So Bitcoin is doing just that. It's got to mature. It will mature, and it will be that superstar down the line.
When can we see Bitcoin become that superstar?
Putting me on the hot seat. Oh, wow.
On the spot, Gareth.
I would say you got to give it another 3 years or so. We got to get through this area. We got to get transparency with regulation. So let's get the regulation out there. I'm rooting for them to get regulation out there. The sooner the better, because we have clarity as investors. Investors love clarity. We want to know that our money's safe. We want to know what's going on with our money when we're investing in things. That's the best case. I think, again, 3+ years out, it becomes that mature entity and can actually thrive.